I'm Caffrey. I'm a senior in high school, and this was the beginning of my obsession with birds with hands. The week before Halloween, I was at work, and I drew this little bird with kind of creepy claws swooping down on the menu. I started thinking about this because it was a really creepy concept. So that night, I went back home and did a collage based on that idea. I started with the hands, which I wanted to be a creepy flesh tone, and then I layered a bunch of paper, which has been covered in different acrylic paint and a bit of Mod Podge to make it shiny. And I also have a piece of dried acrylic paint from the top of my paint tube to give it a really beady eye. This is my first time really working with mixed media, which I was really interested in working with for a while, and I just kind of decided to go for it.
I'm really intrigued by this piece because I think you're doing a lot of really interesting things with mixed media. And also, it's just a really odd, startling image. I'm just kind of wondering why a bird and why hands? Like, how did you arrive at those two subjects and why did you put them together?
Well, at the time, I was thinking a lot about practicing drawing hands for figure studies and stuff because I know that I've drawn them very limp and kind of tiny in the past. Mm-hmm. And then it was also, I think it was because it was around Halloween. I was thinking about the movie The Birds, and I was like, how could this get any worse?
So it's kind of like these two things just merged together because of timing?
Yeah.
Okay, so in some ways it sounds like it was a little arbitrary, that it just happened to be you were watching The Birds, you happened to be thinking about hand drawings, that type of thing.
Yeah, I started thinking about all these situations that could happen with these birds with hands.
Well, like what situation would you imagine them to be in?
Well, I think the first situation I thought of was the idea that you're like sitting in your screened-in porch and you're just kind of chilling there, maybe reading the newspaper a little bit, and then you hear this like knocking or scratching outside. And then there's the door opens. Like, birds opening a door is terrifying.
I wish I had that story in this image. I kind of feel like this image is just the bird in the hands, and that's intriguing, but you're not giving me any context. Like, I want to see a drawing of that bird opening the doorknob. I think this is much more for me about just the visual. Something has changed that you don't expect. Like when you see a bird, you expect to see claws, but instead we see human-like hands. And so we recognize that. But then after I get to that point, I go, okay, now what? Now, the other thing I think you should do is you need to back this up with some research, because historically there have been creatures that have merged birds with people. Like, for example, if you think about the harpies from Greek mythology, I think you got to look that up, because I think that this already has kind of a history behind it, and you have to be aware of it, because otherwise you're kind of working in a vacuum in a way. I think you need to kind of know what came before you, so that way you don't repeat it, and also so that you're doing something that really is innovative. I'm wondering about the mixed media. For example, this is collaged, but this is not. How did you make that decision?
I really wanted the bird to be a completely different texture from the hands, because I wanted it to really feel like the bird's feathers were very oily and slick and dark, and then the hands were just maybe a little bit creepier, but normal human hands.
But see, these don't look like ordinary human hands to me. They look like half claw, half hand. And I think what it is because you've really elongated them a lot. I think if they were a little bit thinner, they'd look more human-like. Also, I don't know if this bird went for a bad manicure, but I'm not buying those fingernails for a second. So I think if you really want these to be literal human hands, you got to draw them better. But to be honest, I like them better as not literal human hands. And I think the rips and the tears, you got to play with scale, because all your rips are the exact same size. Like all your pieces of paper, they're all about this big. Yeah. You don't have little rips. You don't have huge rips. And I think you could let the paper come off the page, so it almost becomes more like a sculpture. And then that brings me to this, because is this mat board?
It's actually like a very thick cardstock.
Okay, so similar to mat board. And I think you should rip this, because this is driving me crazy, this like perfect rectangle. And then you have this really awkward shape up here, but then this is ripped. And so it's almost like you got too many languages going on.
Yeah.
So I think what I would do with this board is I would rip it like crazy. So much to the point that maybe it even becomes like paper pulp. I love that you did this for the eye. I think this is fabulous. You know, when you take the cap off and there's this little ring and people just toss it. I love that you saved it and put it in your piece. That's terrific. I mean, how did you think did you have those lying around, or did you just see it? Or?
Well, while I was doing the painting for this, I was taking off that ring because it's obviously in the way. The black circle in the middle that has nothing there is so accurate to like a beady black bird eye.
Right. No, I mean, I love that you saw that. And I think that's one of the things you need to do if you want to be a mixed media artist. You have to learn to kind of notice things. Like, for example, I have one of my colleagues make sculptures from found objects. And she told me that when she goes to an antique shop, anytime she's walking around outside, she's kind of like looking for particular shapes and forms. And I feel like that's what you did there. You have a cross here. Take a wild guess how everyone's going to interpret that. I'm guessing this is not about religion.
No.
Okay, so you got to be careful that there's certain symbols throughout history that if you put them in your art piece, it's a whole different piece. Like, that's the first thing I saw when I saw this. After I looked at the bird, I thought, oh, there's a cross in his piece. Is this a religious piece? So you got to be careful about that. Like, what I would do is remove this and remove this and just make it a horizontal branch. And by the way, what is this? Is this a branch?
Because I hadn't planned it out beforehand, I just had to give it some sort of thing. So I was thinking it's kind of a telephone pole, maybe.
That's not a telephone pole.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say about your background looks really last minute. It doesn't work with what's happening here. I feel like it would help to have a gradient.
Yeah.
Like maybe if it started dark at the top, got lighter at the bottom, and you need color. I feel like you're using a lot of black out of the tube. Is that accurate or not?
Well, this ended up being charcoal mixed with water.
So this is not acrylic.
Yeah.
But is this acrylic?
I think that has a little bit of acrylic mixed in it.
Okay, so you're mixing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to make is that black out of the tube or just charcoal, it has kind of like a dead kind of color. Yeah. So if you mixed in like a little hint of violet into your acrylic, it just would have a little bit more warmth to it. I mean, one of my favorite parts of your painting is actually these little bits of red that come through. Like, this is very vibrant and really beautiful, but that's not happening in your background. Even though this is kind of the first piece and there's a lot of things I'm telling you to tweak and everything, I'm thrilled about this piece because I think you took a lot of risks. I think you're trying out some really unusual things with imagery, and I think you're somebody who really reacts to different things. Like, you saw the Birds movie, you saw the hands, you saw the texture in the acrylic paint, you saw that tube. And I love the way you're taking just all these different things and you're putting them into one artwork. And that's really inspiring and wonderful.